the title for this morning's conversation and presentation, as you probably saw, is, you got to think like, if you don't think like a CEO, you're doomed. But just to kind of lay the kind of ground rules out there, as Amy and I were chatting about this a few days ago, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have CEO title on your business card, but thinking like a CEO really is just a mindset. It's taking ownership for whatever your role happens to be, no matter how big or how small, one person shop or 1,000 people, it doesn't make a difference. It's having that broader mindset of working and operating and thinking like a CEO would. So keep that in mind as we get into our conversation this morning, for sure. All right, so with that, I'm going to introduce Amy, let her introduce herself also. We've been colleagues for many, many years, actually, but I'll let you introduce yourself and we can get into our conversation. So welcome.
Hi, it's nice to meet some of you that I haven't met. I know the conversation has been getting back in person. I'm really looking forward to getting back in person when we have that opportunity. But I'm Amy Rasdal. I left my corporate job for consulting more than 15 years ago, and I love being a consultant. And today we're not going to talk about consulting, but over a couple of years, as I started doing my outreach as a consultant, I got a lot of people who are coming back and saying, I don't have a project for you, but I know that you've been doing consulting for a while. You love it. Can we talk? And as I started to think about what do I want to tell them? What do I love? What do I hate? What do I wish I would have known? I started to accumulate a body of material, and more people asked me. So I started a second business called Billable at the Beach, which helps people start their own consulting businesses. And I started it right around the same time, just a little after you started Turning Point, I think, Ken. And so Ken and I used to do in-person workshops together back in the day, especially during the Great Recession, right? The bottom fell out of everything right when we started our businesses. So we had a lot of fun doing that. And over the past couple of years, I've transitioned from doing a lot of hands-on consulting fully into Billable at the Beach. I've taken it all online. As I've been doing that, I realized that it's all about sales and marketing, right? Everything that I do, I have all my materials and my programs. My product, I'm very comfortable with, but it's a constant effort to do all of the sales and marketing, which is the reason why I really enjoy this group. And one of the things that Ken and I were talking to, we touched base briefly last week, the title being CEO, I'm a very practical, hands-on, operational type person. So when we talk about CEO mindset today, I don't do leadership or executive coaching. It's very hands-on, nuts and bolts, practical type of stuff that I think we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you. And we'll get into a little more about your background and kind of the transition that you've made as well over our conversation. But yeah, Amy's exactly right. And with the recruiting that I do, with a pretty wide variety of clients out there across different industries, it's the same kind of thing where we see a lot of people that are in these roles, and no matter what their title happens to be, every role involves to some extent sales and marketing. You have to be persuasive. You have to be able to kind of pitch your new budget, your desire to add to your headcount, a desire to get a new ERP system. There's always some degree of sales in there. And same with marketing. You've got to be able to brand your team. You've got to be able to showcase your team's expertise and when you're trying to hire somebody or when you're trying to bring somebody over from another part of the organization. So to Amy's point, sales and marketing is always part of the conversation and should be part of that CEO mindset also, without question.
And for me, I have a technical background. So sorry, I'm jumping in and cutting you off,
sure.
But just a really brief overview of my background. I'm a Silicon kid. I grew up in Silicon Valley. My dad was an early semiconductor guy. So I grew up in a world where it never occurred to me that there was anything to do besides technology startups or fruit orchard farming, because those were the only two things that existed in Silicon Valley in those days. So as a technical person, and in engineering and throughout my career, I've worked a lot with technical people and I have deep experience in both product development, hands-on engineering, and marketing. So a lot of my consulting strength was kind of bridging that gap. But I think it's important even for technical people to always realize that no matter what it is you're always selling, and no matter what you're doing, in my opinion and my experience, it always comes back to relationships and revenue. And if you aren't thinking about those two things, I don't care if you work on the shipping dock, in the deepest lab, if you're not thinking about those things, your ability to move forward, however you define that, is going to be limited.
No, you're exactly right. Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, we have a brand new client actually up in LA called Barksdale. And I bring it up because there is a very large subsidiary of Crane Corporation, which is a huge publicly traded company in the industrial manufacturing space. And one of the things that we were talking about working with their VP of operations and their head of HR was that very point about relationships, right? And they're very well known as an organization for moving people around and also up through the organization. So over 13 years, the current VP of operations has been with 4 different subsidiaries of Crane in 4 different cities across the country because of the relationships that he has built. Even though he's a very linear thinker, he's very, very strong in terms of the operations side, but he learned very early on how important it is to have those relationships within your company, also outside, but certainly within the company. And that's a great example of that CEO mindset. Right, he's looking to get to the next step in his career continually, but he realizes that CEOs, quote unquote, CEO in quotes, right, has to have a good, strong ecosystem, both externally but also internally. So with that in mind, maybe you can talk a little bit, Amy, about kind of what you kind of preach, or kind of how you work with your clients on the consulting side or on the at Billable at the Beach, to help them develop that mindset and help them understand kind of what that is, but also what the importance of it is.
Right. So the whole name of the game in consulting, and I know that some of you probably do it or at least have done it. I like to tell people that doing the actual billable work is almost like being on vacation. That's the easy part for everybody. I don't care what you do. And it sounds a little bit silly, but for me, Ken, I always liked working with Ken because he's identifies as kind of an extreme extrovert. I identify as an introvert, not extreme. But I really enjoy having some amount of time just in my office, just with my computer. It's that software engineer in me that still enjoys part of that. Now, I don't want to do that all the time. And I have another side of me. I've always done a lot of performing arts. So for the pandemic, I've really missed the stage with live bodies giving me feedback. It's just not the same on Zoom. But doing the billable work, a lot of new consultants think, okay, that's the scary part. But I assure them, it seems a little different, weird. You're at a new company, you're the superhero. Once you dig into it, you're going to say, oh, this is what I've been doing for all these years. The hard part is keeping your pipeline full of high quality projects. And I think the biggest surprise to people is Brian, excuse me, Brian made a comment that made me think that aligns really well in his little spotlight this morning. And that is, you can never stop investing in yourself, right? If you think, for me, I do a lot of dance and water skiing. And in both of those things, if I stop working on it, then my level, I don't just stay at the same level, I decline. If I want to go up, I need to work really hard. And it's the same. You can never let up on your pipeline. So I talk about things like you have your sales development engine. You have to always keep your foot on the gas. I like to use the analogy, I went to business school back east, and we did a project for some of the industries that we had occasion to work with were completely different than California. We did a paper mill and we did a glass factory. So in a glass factory, if you ever shut down, you can imagine the whole thing seizes because the glass has to be hot or everything literally seizes up. So I like to think of my business development operations like a glass factory, and I always have to keep something going or the whole thing is going to seize up. And I see that so often in the consulting world. It's very tempting to just completely get busy, bury yourself in the billable work, take on too much work, and ignore all that networking, marketing, business development. So I talk constantly about never let a day go by without doing something toward networking, marketing, business development, start with an hour a day if you can't. And I think that's something that applies, Ken and I were talking last week about what do we want to talk about today, to all of us. Whether you're a CEO, whether you're a direct salesperson, you need to spend time every single day thinking about relationships and revenue again, and what that means to you. I don't care who you are, that applies. I have a big brother, and like many little sisters, I still, even all these years later, idolize my big brother. And I remember him very early on telling me every meeting is an interview. And that sounds a little bit mercenary, but I can remember I went to visit him at his company one time. He's a few years older than me. And I happened to bump into the CEO, and we left, and he said, "Oh, wow, you got to meet Ron Dollins, who went on to be a very big name at Eli Lilly for any life sciences people." And I said, "Yeah, and that's when he gave me the little talk, like every meeting is an interview." So there's all these little things that you pick up over time that are so important. And so I really try to instill that. The other thing I really like to say is, in my early days too, I found networking very intimidating. And what's interesting about me, I talked about I'm an introvert, but I've always done a lot of performing arts. So if you give me a stage, I don't care if there's 10,000 people. In fact, until I got into college and just started doing music, I was a musician, musician dancer at that point. I remember my first college performance, and there were all these people in the hall like shivering. And I said, like, is everybody sick? What's going on? And they say, we have stage fright. We're nervous about going on stage. That's the first time I ever even heard about that someone could be nervous for walking on a stage. But you put me in a networking event, and I immediately feel like I'm at a junior high dance. And I think we can all remember that, right? I have a daughter who's just graduating from high school. So it wasn't too long ago that, right, I had someone in my house going to junior high dances. I would go to those networking events. I would get my glass of wine. I would walk around. I wouldn't meet anybody. I would go home and I would think, I don't get networking. So I also really like to talk to people. Ken and I have talked a lot of, because of our workshops we used to do, a lot of people are scared of speaking. A lot of people don't feel the way that I do. They can get on a stage with 10,000 people and not even feel a nerve. Networking is hard, but everyone can learn how to do it. I don't care who you are. Every single person can learn how to do it. So we talk a lot about that too. And I also really like to emphasize baby steps, right? Just take one step, right? We're all here. One of the things that I love about this group is people are really friendly. And because Ken and Elaine and the SMLA team, I happen to know that Ken's networking philosophy is, rather than what's in it for me, it's what's in it for them. And so that's the spirit, that sets this whole group, but everyone can learn. So in my programs, I talk about all the nuts and bolts stuff, but we really spend a lot of time about how to keep the pipeline full of high quality business. That's the biggest challenge.
No, that's great. Yeah, without question, I agree. And yeah, I remember we used to do our workshops and we used that phrase rather than whiff them, which is what's in it for me. It was whiff it, right? What's in it for them? And we used to tell people all the time, you got to have that mindset. You've got to be thinking about what's happening with the folks around you. Especially just in today's day and age, right, where we can't get as often, we can't be in person as we'd like to. What's going to compel someone to come into a webinar on Zoom and take a couple hours out of their day to do it? So you've got to have that with it approach also. I wanted to share a couple things also that is a nice piggyback off of what Amy is talking about, and really kind of the value that comes out of that networking and having that CEO mindset. One of the things that I'm working through in this and next year, our two really big growth years, is I wanted to determine where our business comes from. Right. And as Elaine will tell you, we've been very good as a team of tracking our source of business. We used to jokingly call that SOB, but source of business, where business comes from. Right. And you'd be surprised I'm always surprised anyway, about how rarely companies I talk to actually do that, especially when it comes to hiring. Right. I'll say, well, where have your best employees come from? And they have no idea. Right? Because you want to replicate whatever's working, do more of it, right? So over the last month or so, I've been focusing on what I call my lifetime customer value. When I bring on a new client in my business, as the leader of this business and working with the rest of my team, I want them to know why it's so important when we bring on a customer, because doesn't just have, ramifications or an effect in the immediate, timeline, but also it has a long-term tail behind it. And so I did all the calculations and figured out that, even though our average fee for any one engagement, one search is about $47,000, looking at the lifetime customer value, it's about $67,000. So another, almost 50%. Reason being, and why I'm bringing this up, is because of that network effect. Because 8% of our clients that come to us will refer us to another client, but more importantly, over a third of our clients will engage us for a second and sometimes third and fourth search, right? So that all wouldn't take place if we didn't have a strong referral network and kind of ecosystem out there as well. So it's really important for even the basic one-person business or a small company like mine where I have 6 people, or hundreds of people, that ecosystem, that network kind of amplifying effect, if you will, really comes into play when you do kind of just the basic calculations about how you're going to grow your business, why it's important to network internally, but also externally, no matter what your business happens to be. Right. I always joke that if companies did a good job at leveraging their current employee base to find new employees, I'd be out of a job, right? Because nobody would need an outside search firm. But they don't do a good enough job in often enough anyway, to have that happen. So whether you're hiring, whether you're making glass products, whether you're in the life science space, it really doesn't make a difference at all. It's really all about what is it that you are doing, how can you amplify that, how can you build out your network with that CEO mindset, and I guarantee it'll come back to you and your clients in spades in terms of revenue as well.
I was thinking of one of my other canisms that I learned, because when we used to do those workshops together, I would do half and he would do half. So I would always listen to his half and, be internalizing all of that. So one of the things that Ken always talks about is, tell me if I'm saying it exactly the way you do, Ken, but work close to the dollar or stay close to the dollar. And so that's another really important thing. And as we think about that, what's in it for them, what's in it for me, the what's in it for them is really important. However, I find that I also have to hold myself accountable. And I really teach this to my people now. You have to hold yourself accountable for your activities being close to the revenue. So as I look at my daily activities, one of the things that I'm always working on for myself is doing things that contribute to revenue and not fooling myself that all those little tasks that it feels so good when you check them off. I don't give myself credit for any of those unless it contributes to revenue. When you're spending time with people or meeting with people, unless I can really draw a line to revenue, I don't give myself business credit. So there might be people that I just like meeting with, and I might choose to do it. But again, working close to the revenue, staying close to the dollar, I think is another thing that I'm always thinking about, so that I keep my activities on task, because on any given day, there's so many things that we can choose from. How do we choose the correct priorities to be spending our time on?
Yeah, very, very well put. Janet had a great question here, about the importance of having referrals and what are some ways that you can accomplish this. So, for those of you that have been part of our group here for a while, that the whole goal between, our speakers and members is to really talk about, truly applicable but real world ways, right, or processes or things that you can do in your business immediately after the meeting. So I'll share some of mine. Maybe Amy, you have some ideas also. A few things that we do in our business to really encourage referrals. And again, back to the whole focus here about having that mindset of a CEO. What can we do for the overall good of our business and our clients' business? So we do things like we send out anniversary cards. So every year anniversary after we place somebody in a job, we send them an anniversary card to just remind them of who we are, but also just to acknowledge their accomplishment. We do things like so for us, when we place somebody in a job, that's when the engagement, at least the transactional part, is complete. We send a gift basket, both to our hiring manager, right? That was our client, as well as to our placement. So it gives them a chance to kind of just, some obviously warm and fuzzies. But when they were actually in the office, it also gave a chance for someone who had a big basket of goodies on their desk. It encouraged other employees to come over and talk to that person. So that's a great way to kind of build that camaraderie as well. We do a lot in terms of, as Amy mentioned before, we do a lot of just kind of thought leadership education. It's not really selling, it's identifying what are the trends that are out there that are relevant to a wide audience and doing a short 2-minute video on it or an infographic, thanks to Vicky and Elaine, or a short little blog, whatever it might be. But those are the things that really, really help us to get those referrals coming back to us as well on a very consistent basis. And I would say, I did a video about maybe 2 months ago talking about how I was doing some more analysis, right? I'm always looking at analytics to figure out, is it a better idea for me to build out a large ecosystem of referral partners and hope that a couple of those, kind of hit the mark and send people to me? Or am I better off focusing on a handful of, a smaller handful of referral partners and really spending a lot of time nurturing them? And I went through all the analytics, and it turns out that the latter is the much better option there. So this might be true for you as well. You're much better off identifying who are the top, let's say 3 to 5 or 5 to 10 referral partners in your network and really spend time with them. Whatever it might be, you should know their birthday, you should know their kids' names, you should know their own anniversary dates, right? Where they like to eat. Are they a dog or a cat person? Do they drink wine? Whatever it might be, really spend the time to get to know those 5 to 10, strong referral partners, and you're much, much better off. Your time is much better spent doing that than trying to add another 25 or 50 people to your network and spreading yourself so thin. So I don't know if anybody else has other ideas, or maybe Amy, you have some of yours too that you do. But those are some of the things that I do as our business, and we also share with our clients as well.
So I think a really important point that takes it back to really, really simple, because Turning Point has such a well-developed referral plan. And some of us might be more in an individual contributor role where that's just not possible. So the most important thing is to find a way to keep in touch on a regular basis. Build that into your week or your day or your month. It can be as simple as a quick note on LinkedIn. It can be as simple as every week. So I have an engineering, I'm an engineer by background, so I like metrics and numbers and process. So maybe you say, I'm just going to reach out to 5 people a week or 10 people a week, and you build that into your weekly activity, or 2 a day, or something like that, to make sure that you keep in touch. So right now I have an initiative that I try and do personal outreach, and I'm reaching out right now to prospects, not, so they're in my network. I have in Billable at the Beach, I've automated a lot of stuff and productized. So I have 6 months worth of 3 times a week automated email content. And every day I pluck 3 people out of that pipeline, and I just do a personal outreach. I dive into LinkedIn, I try and figure out a little bit and make a personal contact. Now, my automated emails, I try and make them seem personal, but it's not quite the same. So it can also, I love all the things that Ken's doing, but it can also be just really simple. And the important thing is make sure you figure out some way to stay in touch on a regular basis.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I make a comment on that, Ken?
Yeah, please, Brian.
Yeah, a lot of folks have tried to use these video integration softwares like BombBomb and Vidyard and things like that. And I've struggled to figure out where to really implement that, because I don't particularly care for it for prospecting purposes. And I'd prefer not to communicate with prospects and clients that way, because that needs to be a two-way conversation for obvious reasons. But per what you were just saying, Amy, I feel that those softwares are really good for keeping in touch with your network, because if you're just pushed for time, you don't have enough time to, let's say I want to call Craig, but I don't want to, get caught up in a conversation with Craig for an hour because I like Craig, and that's what'll happen if I talk to Craig. We'll end up talking for an hour. But I just want to let Craig know that I'm thinking about him. I can send a video saying, "Hey, Craig, Brian here, just thinking about you. Hope all is well with your family. I remember you were saying your son had a broken arm. I hope it's healed. Let me know if I can help you with anything, and have a great day." those videos that you send are a great way to keep in touch with your network and save yourself a little bit of time. That's the only use I can find for them.
Yeah. Yeah,
And that's
and
just
for
me.
those that haven't heard of the ones that the tools that Brian's mentioning, so BombBomb is one, Vidyard is another one. It's basically a way to record a very short 15-second, 20-second video to send to prospects. Now, I will say that to Brian's point, it's a little bit impersonal to make that be your first outreach. So the idea is to send a video recording of yourself as opposed to an email outreach, right? But I will say that I have received it as a follow-up. I will talk to somebody, a prospect, or either I'm a prospect of theirs or vice versa, and then they'll send me a video, quick follow-up. Hey, Ken, it was great talking to you. Glad to hear the business is going well. Glad to hear you got your second vaccination, whatever it is. Just a little personal. And I actually, so we used Phil Ferrari, who's our video, in-house video person or resident expert. And we actually shot 3 videos. One is meant for general prospecting. One is meant specifically for prospects that are in a private equity or private investor situation. And then one actually is focused around people that I've already spoken to. So what I've been doing, because normally I would actually drive out to the prospect's office and meet with them in person. We can't do that right now, obviously. So after I've had a phone call or even a Zoom with a prospect, I will actually send them a link to send them 2 links. One to our compensation guide, because that's a value add, that's information for them. It's not selling, it's just educating, and it's helpful for their whole organization. But I will also send a link to the video that I mentioned. And it just, it just reiterates some of the things that I already talked about in our prospect call, but it's more personal because it's a video. So those are some things you can certainly do. But the overarching theme behind all that is that you've got to find something valuable, a reason to reach out to someone. If it's a friend like Brian reaching out to Craig, you're kind of just, shooting the that's fine. But if it's a prospect that you don't know very well, you can't just call up and say, hey, it was a great conversation. Are you ready to engage my services yet? Or, hey, how can I help? Right? Those open-ended questions really do nothing for the person that you're reaching out to. If instead you say, hey, I have this new salary guide. We put together a new infographic. I saw this article in HBR I wanted to share with you. I just did that with a prospect last week, actually. Here's a great article. So you're not selling, you're just reminding. You're reminding them that A, you're there, B, who you are, because they're going to see your signature and everything, and C, that you're keeping them top of mind. So it's networking and it's business development 101, I realize, but I think a lot of people have gotten away from that because of the whole pandemic. Has thrown everything, really kind of out the window. But remember, always have a specific reason to reach out. And again, that's back to that CEO mindset. How can I build my organization, whether it's a person, a company of 1 or of 1,000? What can I do to better the brand and get the word out there? Any thoughts on that, Amy?
Yeah, I agree. And I think it just, what exactly that is so different for all of us because of what we do, where we are in our organization. And again, just back to the idea that it has to be something. And if you can find meaning in it, another thing that I do is kind of scan press, looking for reasons to touch base and congratulate. Promotions, company announcements, that kind of stuff, because everyone always appreciates being, recognized for their accomplishments. So kind of scanning for that kind of stuff always works too. And like you, I'm always keeping track of the kids and the dogs, and did the kids just go off to college? Did they get a new puppy, a new sailboat? I make all those little notes in my CRM system.
Yeah. And I would say, just again, from practical purposes, for me, I read, Wall Street Journal and Inc. and all those things, right? But the place that I find the highest volume of usable content to share with prospects is HBR, right? Harvard Business Review. The magazine is fantastic. It's so research driven. The one I just finished reading actually was just chock full of the articles that I'm sharing with people left and right, my own internal team, but also with prospects. So if you're going to read something, I highly encourage that you read that because
but
it'll be.
Did you say Harvard Business Review, Ken?
Yeah, HBR. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I haven't read that in a while. I should go back to it.
It's great. It's rare that I pick up a magazine that I'm excited to read and what am I going to learn now? But with that magazine, I'm always learning something. So just a FYI there. The other thing I would say also, and I think again, one of the things that I've seen among my clients during the pandemic is that so many CEOs have been, and leaders in general, have been so reticent to talk to their team because they're afraid of what's out there. There's been a lot of conversation around mental health and people being disengaged and all the issues that are going on. We're all very aware of that. And I think it's made CEOs and leaders a little bit more uncertain and a little bit less connected to their team. And so rather than finding ways to become more connected, they're doing the opposite, and they're kind of recoiling and kind of entrenching in their own little silos, which is the complete opposite of what they should be doing, to be honest. So I encourage you, for your own businesses, but also for your clients, encourage them as well to get out there and talk to their teams. I mean, I'm always surprised, and other people are as well, about how many great ideas come out of their organization. Even if you're looking for sales strategies or marketing strategies, you'd be surprised what comes out of the IT side or what operations has to say about those things. Don't just look to the departments, if you will, that happen to be in that particular domain. Look to the whole organization. And there's no better way to kind of engender yourself to the other employees that you have than to reach out, communicate, be willing to ask questions, be willing to ask for help, and be vulnerable. That is the single biggest thing I think that's allowed for our success as Turning Point, is to say, hey, I don't know everything. I don't know this. I don't know that. Let me find somebody who does, right? Let me ask the team what they suggest. Let me ask the team for feedback on how I'm doing, right? That, again, just speaks to the whole CEO mindset, no matter what your title happens to be.
Well, that's kind of the old school management by walking around, right? A different version of it. I have a teenager right now, so I'm well aware that I know nothing. I'm in that phase of life where I really know nothing. But it reminds me, actually, the last company that I worked inside, it was the CEO's idea, and I liked it. And what he did is he kind of like required everyone on the executive team to grab somebody who didn't work for them and go out to lunch actually every week. And so, that's not quite possible with the pandemic, but it's another interesting, like, just quick and easy, practical idea. Just grab somebody once a week, once a month, grab a Zoom coffee, whatever it is. And it's what you're saying is just touch base and be open and just say, hey, what do you want to talk about? And get a sense of what's going on. I think that's a great idea.
Exactly. Yep. Another piece I wanted to touch on that, Amy, you mentioned a few minutes ago, is about just kind of holding yourself accountable also. And that's, I think, one of the things that is, at least for me, it's most difficult, because as you all know, if you are in that true CEO leadership role, whether you're a consultant of one or a whole team, it's hard to find peers to get feedback from. And it's hard to find peers that are truly willing to push back and say, hey, Ken, you know what? I wouldn't have done that the way you did it. Here's where I saw some gaps in, in your approach, whatever it might be. It's hard to find that. And you've got to, and you're not going to find it if you don't make yourself vulnerable, right? So you've got to find ways to hold yourself accountable, but also to have a team around you, whether it's internal or just a group of peers that are also going to hold you accountable. And so I really encourage you to consider that and remember that as well. You're not going to improve, you're not going to get better at your craft if you don't have people helping you to figure out where the gaps are and where your blind spots are. So that's super important as well.
Hey, Ken, one of the other things that, as I was thinking about as we evolved, our discussion for today, and I do a lot of speaking, but I'm almost always speaking about how to start a consulting business, which we didn't want to do today. And we kind of evolved into this be your own CEO, think like a CEO mindset. One of the other really big things that I think CEO mindset is decision making. And I know in my consulting career, working with executive teams, just very quickly, what I did when I was doing full-time consulting was I have a lot of cross-functional experience, all the way from an engineering bench to the executive level. And I realized what I was really good at was implementation and execution. So the executives set the programs and strategies. I come in and focus on implementation and execution, otherwise known as just getting things done. I'm very good at hands-on practical stuff. So one of the biggest things that I always saw that was holding companies back, and again, I wasn't doing strategy consulting, it really is kind of strategic thinking, is decision making. So I have a very strong belief that if you don't make your decisions make you. I've talked about how I grew up in Silicon Valley. So one of my heroes was Andy Grove. And my dad was a semiconductor guy. He didn't work at Intel, he worked somewhere else, but I knew those guys growing up. And Andy Grove used to always talk about that. And it's in some of his books. He has a great book called High Output Management. It's a really old book, but it's really just practical, to the point, and good. And he really talks about, if you don't make your decisions make you. So if you don't actively decide to do something, your time will be taken up, right? And what I see so often with the executive teams that I work with, and now I take this into myself and my own business, is being willing to make the decisions. And what I see across there is that it's harder to say no than it is to say yes. And I believe that it really, if you boil it all the way down to its root cause, and remember, I'm an engineer, so we're always trying to find root cause, it's fear. It's really the fear that I'm going to be the one that said no to the next iPhone. So what almost everyone does is we take on too many initiatives. So as I was going in working with these companies, again, I wasn't doing strategic consulting, I was getting things done. There were two things that I always did: really pushed on decision making, actively saying yes and not being afraid to say no, and then prioritizing. So in order to get things done, I really pushed on, you can only have one number one. And that's a very uncomfortable thing for a group of executives to tell a board. Guess what, board? We're only going to work on one thing, right? Nobody can say that. But if you can get alignment on what that top priority is, and then the second, third, fourth, then all of a sudden you have alignment. So for me as a solo practitioner right now, then every time I sit down to get work done, and during the pandemic, I've got school age kids, I've been teaching first grade, I've been doing college applications, all the things. Every time I sit down at my desk, I may only have 15 minutes. And I think this applies to all of us these days, pandemic or no. I know my number one, so I know exactly what I'm working on. If you apply that then for those of you out there, yourself, your team, your company, your kingdom as a CEO, you imagine inside a big company, if everyone's very clear from the CEO to the shipping dock, what's the number one, every single time those myriad decisions that you're faced with every day, what to spend your time, how to do this, how to do that, if everyone's clear on the number one, so much alignment comes automatically. So those decision making, this whole idea again, if you don't make your decisions make you. You can only have one number one. Those are things that I really try to push, that I think we can all incorporate into our CEO mindset.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. I think the decision making is, it seems so trite or kind of cliche. Oh yeah, you should make good decisions. Well, of course we all think that, but in reality, a lot of us don't do the best job we possibly can in actually executing. I know for me, and again, this is, as my company has grown and as we continue to grow, I have to make the decisions largely around what do I do personally in-house versus what do I decide to outsource, right? And it might seem like a really simple thing, but I remember when I did the first year I was incorporated and I tried to do my own taxes, used QuickBooks, thought, oh, this is great. How hard can it be? I sent it to my CPA and he said, what the bleep are you doing, Ken? I'm like, I don't know, right? I had done it all wrong. And I realized, okay, so what's the value here of me paying this individual, this expert, this CPA, versus me trying to do it? And what I decided to do was sit down and figure out, okay, so what is an hour of my time worth? Right? Whether it's revenue generation, whether it's marketing, branding, engineering, no matter what your expertise is, what is 1 hour of your time worth, right? And then once you've got that number and you've got that alignment, internally your own that personal alignment, then you decide, okay, if I pay somebody X dollars to do this, it'll take me 6 hours to do my books. It'll take somebody else 2 hours. Is that worth it? And the answer actually can be pretty easy and pretty quick when you have that number to go off of. So I've since outsourced a lot of things that I used to do myself, right? And it makes perfect sense. So that's one of those examples, I think, of being willing to make those decisions and not say yes. I could have very easily said, yes, I'll do the bookkeeping. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do that, because it seemed like it made sense. But when I broke it down and really kind of did that accountability and that kind of that revenue model, if you will, I realized the better answer was no, I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to outsource it instead. So that's just one example where that's come in handy for me for sure.
Another of the Andy Grove concepts is your only finite resource is your time. You can't make more of it. You can't warehouse it. I'm a person that likes to stay up till 3 a.m. thinking that that's effective and efficient, and it's not sustainable forever. So you have to be really careful about your time. You can get more people, you can get more money on time. And it's true in consulting, in my programs. One of the things that I like to really push on that concept with is, if I don't want to see anybody doing their own website, right? Everyone thinks, oh, I can just use this little tool and I can do it in a few hours. The reality is, like it or not, it's going to take you 3 days. And at a minimum of $1,500 a day worth, you just bought yourself a $5,000 website. And by the way, you didn't do any networking, marketing, or business development while you were putting that together. And by the way, it's not representative of your level of professionalism because it's not a professional website. So same vein of thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, again, if we had this conversation pre-pandemic, we all would have been in, happy-go-lucky growth mode. Things were going great, and we didn't realize how complacent a lot of us had become, myself included. The pandemic has turned all of that on its ear. We've all had to rethink pretty much everything. And now, as we get back to, some sense of what it used to be like, pre-pandemic, we have to make some decisions. Am I going to go to the same number of networking events that I went to pre-pandemic? Probably not, right? I'm going to be more selective. And again, it's the willingness to say no, right? And say, I don't need to go to so many things. I've talked to a lot of folks, I'm sure Brian has as well, a lot of sales folks that said, I'm not going to go back to traveling 80%. I'm not willing to give that time up. I've traveled very little over the last year with the pandemic, and I'm not going to travel zero, but 80% is just too much. I didn't have a life. I didn't have a spouse. I didn't have time with my kids, whatever it was. And so they're making those hard choices that they are now, A, it's a kind of forced decision, but B, I think it's kind of a luxury. A lot of us would not have even considered taking a step back to reconsider our lives or how we did things pre-pandemic. We were just kind of going through the motions, and it's the same old, right? So it's really changed. So I encourage you to think about that in terms of, as you are making new CEO-like decisions, as we get back to some sense of normalcy, really sit down and figure out what's the right activity level, what's the right engagement level, what's the right volume of activity for you going forward. Don't just go back into the old mode just because you think you have to. Really rethink that. Amy, I know that you have, I think, 3 kind of core principles that you want to share also as we kind of wrap things up here, that really kind of drive you and you help with your clients as well.
Yeah, so it's not so much core principles, because I'm a practical girl. It's what I call, I'm going to drop a link in the chat in case anybody wants to grab it so I don't forget when I start talking. I call it my 3 action steps to generate revenue now. And I teach it as part of my consulting. I go through it almost every time that I speak somewhere. And I teach it in the concept of consulting, but I think it's really relevant to this, back to kind of revenue and relationships that we've been talking about. So I don't think it matters what your level is or what you do. I think it can be molded to different objectives, but it's back to my idea of very simple and practical. So the 3 action steps to generate revenue now. Number 1 is put together your value proposition. So we're all sales and marketing folks. We know a little bit. That's just kind of your elevator pitch. So for me, I'm trying to sell consulting services. For you, you might be trying to sell yourself into your next position, or maybe it's just a relationship that you're trying to build with a target company. So think of what your value proposition is in your context. It's important that your value proposition is customer facing or customer focused. So a super quick story, it's one from consulting, but hopefully you can take it and turn it. I always find real life examples to be helpful. So I had a billable at the beach client. He was director of software development at a software company. Every software company has someone who leads product development. It's a director, it's a VP, it's a CTO. So he wanted to do similar type of activities and use that expertise on a consulting basis, but he wasn't getting any traction. So I said, okay, when you were in that role, did you ever use consultants? And he said, well, sure, I did. And I said, what were the projects, tasks, and activities that you use consultants for? Once we took his value proposition and spun it into projects, tasks, and activities that were appropriate for a consultant, not a full-time employee, then he started to get traction. A great way to achieve this is to reach out to a few people. Ken was saying getting peer feedback. Reach out to a few people with your value proposition, a couple of friends, couple of people from this group, and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. What do you think? The feedback they'll give you, they will serve as customer proxies and help you make sure that it's customer facing. The next thing you want to do is make your list. Make your list of people that you want to tell about what you're trying to do. So in the consulting world, people who are brand new consultants and just getting started, I say, I want you to find 100 people that you've worked with before. These are people that already know you, that you do great work and could hire or refer you. So this is a way to reach out to your referral network. So for me, I'm reaching out to all these people for consulting projects, and that's what I'm teaching. But let's say, again, something that may be more common for this group, you have a target company. So you may not have 100, but you want to reach out and think, okay, who do I know inside that company? And by the way, in my career as a consultant, I think a lot of new people go into it thinking, oh, well, I have to have my relationships at the executive level. I get way more referrals from people who used to work for me at the lower levels in the ranks than at the executive level. So don't underestimate your connections in the working folks. They usually have a better idea of what's really happening throughout the company than the executives may. So don't underestimate who that might be. So you have a target company. Who do I know in the company? And then who do I know outside the company who can kind of talk about me, refer me, check me? So look at your list of people that you're going to reach out to. Then you take your value proposition, you take your list, and you tell all those people what you're trying to accomplish. So in the consulting context, what it is this is what I use to get people off the ground and rolling. I like to teach that it's really easy to get started in consulting, that you can be generating revenue as soon as next week. It's hot lead generation. So you're reaching out to people, they already know you. They know that you do great work. What you're looking for is a project that's appropriate for your skills and the budget to pay for it. So what I've learned statistically in my consulting folks, for every 100 people that they reach out to, or I reached out to when I was doing this, you get back 3 to 5 people who say, oh, you know what, Ken? I may have something for you. I may have an open spot that, a recruiting thing, whatever it might be. Let's talk. And out of those 3 to 5 hot leads, the odds of closing 1 or 2 of those deals is very high. So it's a very simple process. Put together your value proposition, make your list, do your outreach, and then whatever follow-up is necessary. And for me in my consulting, and this is what I teach in my program, it made up the foundation of my business development program. It gave me a way to keep in touch with everybody I knew once a quarter. So I did this specific outreach, on kind of a mass level every quarter. You can incorporate it however it makes sense for what you do. But there are 3 simple steps. I have an email course on my website. I put the link in the chat. If anyone's thinking, oh, that sounds interesting, I want to dig in, my free email course will take you a couple layers deeper on really figuring out how to implement that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Amy. I just kind of did a quick summary in the chat as well for those 3 action items. So thank you for that. And the last thing that I would like to leave you with just from my side is, again, that whole idea of a mindset of a CEO. there are all kinds of CEOs out there. We have clients that are CEOs that came up the sales and marketing route. Some came up finance and operations, others came out up engineering or the technical side. And I think one of the things that the best clients that we see have in common is that those, no matter what their background is, the CEO knows his or her strengths and also knows his or her blind spots, and has built a team, whether it's an internal team or a network, an external ecosystem team, if you will, has built that team to amplify the strengths, but also to kind of fill the gaps on the blind spots, to find ways to really kind of narrow down, if you will, narrow those blind spots and eliminate them if at all possible. So back to being vulnerable, be willing to sit down for yourself and figure out, okay, what's going on? What am I good at? And what do I not, where I kind of, fall short? And then build your network, build out your outreach, build your ecosystem around that. And if you need someone, to help you with that outreach, then, you need to find someone to bring on board or somebody to partner with. Go that route. You're much better off having a kind of a tag team approach than trying to do it all and just failing miserably because you're really not, leveraging your strengths at all. So be willing to kind of hold yourself accountable, but also be willing to build that team around what your strengths and weaknesses are too. All right, great. Any other last questions from the group before we wrap up here that we can touch on? All right, well, I'm glad you all joined us this morning. Hopefully this is helpful in building out your business. If you have any follow-up, as always, Amy is available, as am I, through LinkedIn or email either way. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to share some other ideas and examples from our worlds. And then we will see you all next month. Also, we're going to be doing a panel conversation focused around kind of what's out there in the sales and marketing stack and really what's coming as far as trends go. Since a lot of our customers, a lot of our clients have changed their buying habits, we've got to make sure that we're changing our selling habits as well. So that'll be our panel conversation next month in June. Other than that, enjoy the rest of the week and the month. And thank you all for being here. I'll see you next month. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks for
Thanks,
having
Amy.
me, Ken.
Thank you.